These are my top 10 SMGs in the CDL heading into Modern Warfare 3. We're going to kick it off talking about honorable mentions. Now, these are guys that just missed out on my top 10, and these three players are Hook, Capsule, and Nero. I think all three of these guys, especially when they're playing at their best, can absolutely be some of the best SMGs in the game. Nero, super high impact, fast-paced SMG. Capsule, really good Slayer. We saw how good Hook was last season. At one point in the year, Hook and Shotzi were probably the best SMG duo in Modern Warfare 2. So I really think these three could break into the top 10. But starting it off with number 10, it is going to be Afro. Afro coming onto a new team with the LA Thieves, partnering up with Joe DeCease. It's going to be interesting to see how this team can play out because they look like a very high ceiling, low floor type of team. But I also thought Afro last season actually looked pretty good. Now, he got dropped from Minnesota Rocker, which definitely hurt his stock. But I think overall, Afro was still playing pretty well. And personally, for me, was not the player I think they should have dropped from this team. But I do think coming into this next year on the LA Thieves with new coaches, a new environment, and hopefully somewhere where he can flourish, I think Afro is deserving of being number 10. Coming in at number 9, a player who I feel like is a bit similar to Afro is going to be Standy. Another SMG who's good to give you a 1.05 in just about every series. But I feel like Standy is actually a very consistent player, and we saw what happened when he joined the Vegas Legion team last year. I feel like he really helped them turn around their season and helped them try to make that push for champs, even though they didn't make it. Despite being dropped from the Toronto Ultra last season and replaced for Hixie, I thought Standy was actually playing pretty good, and the Ultra team was also performing pretty well. But of course, there's differences when it comes to roles and team chemistry that have to be taken into account. But I think for me, Standy is definitely a top 10 SMG heading into next year. Coming in at number 8, a player who I always feel like I'm underrating and I always feel bad putting at number 8 is Kleenex. Unfortunately, I think there's just so many good SMGs in the league, and Kleenex coming in at number 8 might not seem that great when you're looking at it from a top 10 perspective, but Kleenex is in the upper echelon of players, and I think these top 8 are all much better than the SMGs under them. But having Kleenex at number 8, like I said, I feel bad about it, but I think he's an incredible player, the only player to win every single year of the CDL. Such an impact player, tends to make the right plays. Sometimes he might only give you like a 0.9, but we've seen how consistent Ultra has been as a team over the last few years, and that's a lot of it didn't do in part to Kleenex. I mean, Kleenex has been in 2 champs grand finals in the last 3 years, which is absolutely insane. And then coming in just ahead of Kleenex, a player who I already know the comment section is going to go crazy for, I do have Shotzi at number 7. Don't get me wrong, Shotzi is an incredible player, and with a game like Modern Warfare 3, which is rumored to have better movement, similar to more like something we saw in maybe Vanguard or Modern Warfare 2019, I do think Shotzi is going to move up this list. But going based off of last season, Shotzi was a bit inconsistent, and I think the guys ahead of him I personally would have taken. But I think Shotzi heading into next season with this new Optic Texas team filled with superstars, I do think he's going to have a much better and much more consistent season. But like I said, just going based off of what we saw last year, I honestly had to put Shotzi at 7. Coming in just ahead of Shotzi for me is going to be Envoy. I have Envoy at number 6. He's another player who can struggle with consistency, but I feel like Envoy tends to make a lot of the right plays. He's able to hit routes, he's able to entry, he's good at every game mode, and I think overall Envoy's a very solid player. Envoy has also been another player similar to what I said with Kleenex that has been able to prove that he can win and be consistently a top player and keep his team as a top team in the league. And I think heading into next year on this Ultra team to be teaming up with Kleenex, I think that Ultra team is going to be insane. But of course, this video is not predicting who's going to be the best. Now we're into our top 5, and at number 5, I do have Kismet. I'm not going to underrate the Bulldog this year. I'm sure a lot of us underrated him at points last season because when you're playing with a guy like Hydra, it's hard to necessarily attribute success to other players because Hydra is that superstar player on the team. But Kismet was an absolutely insane player, and I think what we saw in the finals really demonstrated that. Kismet and Envoy, 5 and 6 on my list, are 2 of the best complementary SMGs in the entire league. You can put them alongside just about anybody, I think, as an SMG duo, and they would do their role, and they would enable their teammates to win. And I think Kismet, just what we saw with NYSL last year, winning half of the events, his performance in all the majors, especially in finals, this guy is just absolutely incredible. Coming in at number 4, a player who has been heavily underrated after this past season and even in the Vanguard season, it's going to be Simp. I still think Simp is one of the best SMGs in the game. I know his stats are not what they looked like in Cold War when he was MVP Simp, but the dude changed his playstyle. He still enabled his team to win. Obviously, FaZe is not winning as much as they were in Cold War, but you also have to remember Simp changing his playstyle is not necessarily him just deciding, hey, I don't want to be an MVP anymore. His teammates and the coaching staff are of course going to have their input and maybe want him to change his playstyle, which is why he's been playing the way he is. But I think Simp, considering everything he's been doing, is still such an amazing player. Atlanta FaZe are always number 1 on the standings. They didn't place outside the top 3 at any event this past year. And I mean, I think people who don't have Simp in their top 5 SMGs are just a little crazy. But coming into our top 3, I think these 3 are undoubtedly the top 3 SMGs, especially based off last season. If you have anybody else in your top 3, personally personally, for me, I just don't really see it. I think these are the top three, but at number 3, it's going to be Pred. It's very difficult to have an SMG player that's going to pretty much give you a 1.2 every single series, and Pred is one of those guys. Pred is one of the most consistent players in the league, bar none. I mean, this guy literally, like I said, will give you a 1.15, a 1.2, a 1.25 every single series. He very rarely has a bad series, and I mean, this is just, any team would want this player. Any team would want to build around Pred, and Optic Texas is in for an incredible season bringing this guy onto the roster. He's great in literally every single game mode, especially in Search and Destroy, which I personally think he was probably the best SND player last season, but he's definitely up there tied with a few other players. But Pred, he's just so incredible. He's such a good slayer. He makes a lot of the right plays. He seems like a really good teammate as well, and for me, he's number 3. But now we get into our top 2, obviously between aBeZy and Hydra. For me personally, and this might be, you know, a little bit of a shock, or this might seem a little crazy, but I actually have Hydra at 2 and aBeZy at 1. I know Hydra just won champs. I know he won 3 out of 6 events. I know he won MVP, but for me personally, aBeZy was the best player last season up until Major 5. When you're the best player for 90% or 85% of the season, I think he's deserving of being number 1 on my list. I even think for some people, you weren't crazy to give him MVP last season. I personally would have given it to Hydra if it was up to me, so I'm glad he did win, but I think aBeZy was very much deserving of an MVP as well. In terms of Hydra at number 2, I mean, he was pretty much the best player last season, obviously winning MVP, winning champs, winning 2 majors. The dude's incredible. He's going to give you a 1.2 every single series, and he's just absolutely going to slay out, especially with someone like Kismet on his side. Just an incredible sub duo. But for me, aBeZy has been probably the best player in the league for the last couple of seasons, in my opinion. He plays the hardest role in the game, and he does it the best, which is something I say all the time when I talk about aBeZy, but to be able to play his role and be the best at it is just such an incredible feat to be able to accomplish. And this guy, already a top 10 player of all time. I'm not disrespecting him in any way. I'm putting him at number 1 in my list. But those are my top 10 SMG players going into next season for Modern Warfare 3. Let me know what you think about the list. I'm sure there's already a ton of comments down there talking about how I'm crazy for putting Shotzzy at 7. I'm sorry, I just didn't think Shotzzy was as good as we expected him to be, or as we have grown to expect him to be in recent years. But this is my list. If you have anyone else in this list that I didn't mention, or even honorable mentions, let me know in the comments. Hopefully you enjoyed, and sub to the channel for more CDL content. Hopefully I'll see you all in the next video.